Why do I think surfing is a sport, and what could it be otherwise? Well, you're gonna see all over social media, surfing is more like an art. And it's very interesting what people want to communicate by that, by saying that surfing is not a sport. For example, Nat Young, in his book Church of the Open Sky, the first line of the book is surfing is not a sport. And it's very important. He wants it to be a spirituality, a religion, something like that. This is because he was alienated from competitive surfing by his own competitive drive. So he thought that the competitiveness of sport doesn't speak to the average everyday experience of surfing. And I'm suspicious of this. Why am I suspicious of this? Gotta pause, sorry. Because sports competition doesn't mean necessarily violence and war and animosity and full-scale alienation. You can have competition and have a perfectly good, fun time. You can leave it on the court. You can leave it in the water. The sporting nature of sports, the other idea, I think, the sporting nature of sports is in the play. So we do sports for playing. Some sports have more rules than others. Surfing has a more rule-bound form, which is the competitive aspect. And then in the recreational aspect, sorry, Rockaway pause, they're really on a roll today. In the recreational aspect of surfing, there are rules that we call etiquette. And I have other videos on etiquette that you will see in this series, but I'm not going to go through those right now. But we do have rules. They might not be written somewhere in a plaque, but the culture has existed for a long time, and we have unwritten rules about how ideally a surfing lineup should work. Sometimes the lineup is bounded. It's bounded by the bathymetry. So no, it's not the same as a court, but even in sports like, let's say, golf, tennis, soccer, football, wind affects what they're doing. Rain affects what they're doing. It's not moving like the ocean, but they are affected by weather and other kinds of circumstances. That was actually Hawaiian Airlines, believe it or not. So yeah, surfing is special as the kind of sport that it is, but it is an athletic activity, a sport with its own sporting history. And there's literally just no upshot to taking the sporting aspect away from surfing. Saying something is an art versus a sport and making a category distinction between this is more of an art and this is more of a sport actually serves no purpose at all whatsoever. We have to think about what are people desiring when they want surfing to be an art, not a sport. Well, that thing I said about alienation and competition, they want surfing to be a free expression, and that somehow that free expression is not bound to subjective judgments of excellence. But that's not art. Art is bound to subjective judgments of excellence, right? Art has an industry. Art gets perverted by capitalism. Art is not pure. So what people want when they say surfing is an art versus a sport is they want some kind of purity and some kind of allowance that's going to say whatever your free expression is counts. This isn't a competition in such a way that if your expression is not deemed virtuous or excellent, you don't get to do the thing. But you could play any sport poorly, just like you could paint any picture poorly. You could be crappy at basketball and still play basketball. Nobody is stopping you. You might not get on an elite league or make the NBA, but you still get to play basketball. I'm gonna have more videos where I go into what is called the great art sport debate in surfing. But for now, what I wanna leave you with is why I think it's beneficial to consider surfing a sport, its own particular kind of sport. And that is because, just as in all sports, there are certain athletic techniques that help you excel at the sport. Furthermore, it's super physically demanding in a way that painting a picture simply is not. And if we prepare with our fitness and nutrition for the sport, surf specifically, we can excel further just like other athletes do at their sport. So when we consider it a sport, we're taking it seriously as an athletic endeavor. It's extraordinarily physically demanding, and there are sets of teachable techniques that help you do better at it. In this way, and this is what I'll talk about in later videos, art and sport are very similar. There are sets of techniques that allow you to do certain things in an art, just as there are certain sets of techniques that are learnable and teachable in a sport. So that's maybe the last thought that I will say after I do a pause for this enormous airplane. This one is huge. The bigger ones are louder. I will have a lot more to say about these categories, art, sport, and what people want out of them. Ultimately, I side with the philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein, and I think that a better category for lots of things and practices in human life is his concept of language games, which are a form of life, which have grammar, and those allow us to expand our idea of the various ways that we do different practices, and it shows us that a lot of human practices are just more similar than they are different. So I think it's helpful to consider surfing as a sport that has its own aesthetic, a sport that has, free expression and beauty and all of that kind of thing. But I don't think that there is any real upshot to calling it an art and not a sport. That's a wrap. Like, subscribe, go over to my website, canadasurfclub.com, and I'll catch you in another video.